Good morning. Welcome to Brady Lane this morning. As you can see, I'm not Jeff. Jeff and Amy took some time away, and they will be back tonight for trunk or treat. They did not want to miss that, but took some time away this week, so you get me. So I'm excited to be able to preach to you guys today. One of the cool facts is that as I was preparing this sermon, I had already prepared our lessons also for our 8:30 and 11 o'clock services for elementary and preschool. And so their lessons were on the same topic as what we're talking about today, or at least the same character story. So one of the things that kind of became a side thing to that I didn't realize was going to happen too, was that our junior high and senior high, their lessons for Sunday school were also on this subject. Whenever I opened it up, I was like, okay, God, apparently we're going to talk about this across the board today. So we're glad you guys are here. And so as we get ready to start, I wanted to tell you about an old wise tale from the 1930s. You can find it on the internet. It may or may not be true, but the guy's name in the story is Desert Pete. So I guess you can take that for whatever it is. It may be true, it may not be. But somewhere in the Nevada desert, supposedly, if you take a certain road that is not traveled well, you will find a well in the middle of the desert with a pump. And attached to that pump is going to be a tin can with a note inside of it. And good old Desert Pete has left a message in there for anybody who finds it, so maybe if you go traveling, you might find it. The note said this: "This pump is all right as of June 1932. I put a new sucker washer into it, and it ought to last 5 years. But the washer dries out, and the pump has got to be primed. Under the white rock, I buried a bottle of water out of the sun and cork end up. There's enough water in it to prime the pump, but not if you drink it first. Pour about 1/4 of the water in to let her soak the wet leather, then pour the rest medium fast and pump like crazy. You'll get watered up, fill the bottle and put it back like you found it for the next feller. Signed, Desert Pete. P.S. Don't go drinking the water first, prime the pump with it, and you'll get all you can hold." Now, that takes a lot of faith. First of all, faith for Desert Pete that someone's going to come along and actually follow the instructions and do what they're supposed to do. If any of us have worked around people long enough, you know that that's not necessarily a guarantee that that's going to occur. There's also faith of the traveler who is desperate for a drink of water, and they find a bottle buried in the ground full of water, but they have to first pour it out before they can have water. Things that most people are like, I'm not sure if I trust this or not. But it is exactly the picture of what God requires from us when it comes to faith. Pete had a plan that he put together to help all those who came along the weary road looking for water. Try to do it your way and ignore the instructions, and you will only find momentary quenching of your thirst. Pete didn't put the instructions out there to make life harder, but to make it easier on the weary traveler. All that is perfect reflection of how God does things for us. Life can become very weary at times, but our faith that God is in control and helps us to push onward. Today we're going to get a bird's eye view of what a rock-solid faith looks like. Not a faith of what have you done for me lately, but a faith that trusts the creator of it all. The one who left the message on the pump handle and a little bit of water in the bottle for us to find in life. Jesus spoke directly to this when he talked about the parables of the seed falling on the ground. He talked about the seed that fell on the road and didn't do anything. And the seed that fell among the rocks, but it grew up and it got burned up by the sun. Or the seed that fell among the thorns, and eventually the thorns would take out the what grew. But the seed that fell on the ground, on the good soil, on the ground that was prepared and ready to grow, that is where the seed took root, and there was growth, and there was big and strong plants that would grow from that. And that's the way God wants us to do life. If we will allow him to plant us in the right place and allow us to trust in him and his faith, God will bless us. We can find faith in that, but the blessings will be within his plan and not ours. A concept that is way too hard in a world today that has convinced us that everything that we want can be given to us. If you need happiness, you can find it however you want. See if that's me trying to do that. Try that again. If you want it, you can find it. There is always a way to find the happiness you're looking for, as this world tells you. But it is a fake happiness. It is a happiness that does not stay, does not quench your thirst the way it's supposed to. It only does it for a short time. But as we focus on a rock-solid faith, we're going to focus on a boy who knew how to do this, a young man named David. Now, we'll eventually know him as King David, but we're still looking at him as a teenager at this point. The story we're going to focus on comes from 1 Samuel 17. And it is after David has actually been anointed king, but really the only people that know he's going to be king is him and God and Samuel and his family. No one else is really aware of that. And yet he still respects the king who is in place. He still respects King Saul. He still calls him king. He does not act like he is a man waiting for his chance to take over the world. He still lives his life the way he knows that God's got a plan. We find David showing up with some food for his brothers at the front lines during a battle. He's surprised to find the Israelite army just standing there afraid to go and attack. He saw the same man that they have seen day in and day out, twice a day for 40 days. 80 different times, people have watched this man Goliath stand in front of the army of Israel and the Israelites refused to go and attack. Scripture says that he was 6 cubits and a span tall. Now, for all those that don't have the app on your phone to take cubits and spans and figure out what that means, that is about 9 feet and 9 inches tall. So where does the Israelites' army faith rest in this moment? When you look at 1 Samuel 17:25, it says, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." All they got to do is go fight that guy. If they win, they get all that. And that's what the Israelite army knew. But their faith was in the things that they could get, and that wouldn't even move them from where they were at. So how do we have the rock-solid faith like David? Step 1, step out on faith. David comes along, he steps out on faith and challenges them to stand up for God. Verse 26, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is the uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" You can almost hear the indignation in his voice. He is so mad that they won't go out there and challenge it. He looks to Saul and he says, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." And you can almost hear the laughter in Saul's voice when he's like, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man. He has been a warrior from his youth. Who are you to go fight that Goliath?" None of that mattered to David. He knew God had a plan for his people. Being destroyed by an enemy army was not part of those plans. His faith was rock solid because he had his faith in God. And so that leads us to this. When I think about faith and stepping out, Indiana Jones is the first thing that comes to mind every time. Okay? So you got Indiana Jones, Last Crusade. I always worry I'm going to get that wrong, but the Last Crusade. Indiana Jones, for those who don't know, he and his father have been tasked with trying to find the treasure, find the Holy Grail. The enemy has decided they want to find it too, but they want to take the easy way, so they use them to find it. And for some incentive, they have shot his father, and now his father is dying. And the only way you're going to save him is if you find the Holy Grail. And so he stands there at that cliff, and he tries to figure out what he's supposed to do, because the book tells him that there will be a bridge that will get him from there to the spot where the Holy Grail's at. But he has to have faith in it. And he's looking over this cliff where all you see is rock down below. Now, he does more than I would do, because he does the whole, okay, I'm going to trust this, and he does the whole foot thing, and he drops down onto it. Now, if anybody's else like me, I'm probably sitting there tapping around, making sure there's something there. Not Indiana Jones. He just drops onto it. And you can see the relief come over him as he lands, and his foot lands on solid ground, because he has found the one small bridge that there is. And he walks across this bridge, and he takes dirt, and he throws it back across the bridge. And of course, the bad guy's like, oh, good, I can do it now. And so he runs across the bridge too, because he can see it. Later in the scene, you see them have to choose which one's going to be the Holy Grail. Is it going to be the nice, shiny cup? Is it going to be the one that's got jewels on it? Is it going to be the one that's dirty and worn and doesn't look like it's anything? Sure enough, the bad guy takes the wrong one, drinks from the silver one, and he dies. But you can't have a movie like that and not have someone die like that. The bad guy's always got to die, I guess. But then you see Indiana Jones choose the cup that's the right cup, because he thought about how it would be Jesus' cup and how he thought it would be. Now, that's just a movie, but it shows us the faith and how important faith is and how important it is to know our God, to have that faith in him, that he's got it all under control. Matthew 14, we see Peter, who is having his own faith moment. I've told the kids in class that I refer to Peter as the kid who always raises his hand first before he knows the answer, just because he wants to be the first one to answer the question. So, if God's like, hey, you want to go jump off a cliff? Yeah, I'll do it. Oh, wait, you just said jump off a cliff. But he's on a boat. He sees Jesus walking on the water, and he's like, okay, I want to walk on the water too. So he gets out of the boat. He walks across the water to Jesus. And everything's going grand until he starts to pay attention to the storms that are going on around him. He takes his eyes off Jesus, and he starts to sink and instantly starts screaming, Jesus, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. He's standing right in front of the Son of God, and he's afraid he's going to die. But how many of us would have been doing the same thing? Because we do it every day. God shows us each and every day the faith that we can have in him and the belief we should have, and we constantly are screaming to Jesus, please save us, please save us. Because we all are human, and sometimes we fail, and sometimes we have that fear of faith in God. But Peter eventually gets saved by Jesus as usual, and he comes out of it. But how many times have we taken our eyes off Jesus and let the storms of life distract us from where God's leading us? But even the great David fell into the trap of doubting God in his lifetime, but not in this moment. In this moment, he reminds all of Israel that they need to trust God and that God's plan is best even in the face of fear. Dig up the water bottle. Step number 2, faith in action. For David, he was just willing to say they would stand. He wasn't willing to just say that they would stand up for God. He was willing to actually do it. Faith requires action from us. If you have faith that the milk in your fridge is not spoiled, then you're going to have to take the chance of actually smelling it or maybe even drinking it to make sure that it's not bad. Or you could do what I did when Anna and I were first married. I was on the phone, and she decided she wanted to see if the ham in the fridge was bad. She asked me, would you please smell this and tell me if it's bad? What I didn't pay attention to was there was ham in front of me, so I took it and ate it. The story is that the ham was bad. So don't eat the ham. But we were 2 young kids. Ham just hung around in our fridge just like everything else. But the deal was, I couldn't be mad at my wife because I ate the ham. She didn't tell me to eat the ham. She told me to smell the ham. If I had listened to her, yes, a man stood and said, if I listened to my wife, if I had listened to her, I would not have had the bad taste that I had in my mouth. Too many times we get angry at God because we think God didn't do what we asked him to do. But what happened is that we asked him to do something that God never intended to do. God had a plan, and our plan was not his plan. And sometimes we have to get that bad taste out of our mouth and trust that God's plan is better than ours. Sometimes we need to remember that our faith comes from trusting what God says he will do and not what we want him to do. There are plenty of ministers out there that will preach a story to you and a message to you that if you want it bad enough and you need it bad enough, you can pray for it and God will give it to you because you just have to pray hard enough. And that is just not the way it is. The Bible does not tell us that. It says to seek God's direction, not our own. Remember, the goal is to go and get the water from the well, not to drink the water in the jar. David wasn't going to let anyone, including the king, tell him that he couldn't stand up for his God. When we look at verses 34 through 37, he responds to Saul's concerns, your servant Notice he said servant, not future king of you or your replacement. He respected Saul because he was still king. He says, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the Philistine. If you notice, he didn't say, I will go and defeat that giant because I am that good. He did not say, I have the best weapon in the world to defeat him. He said, I will go and defeat them because of the training that I have had, because God has prepared me for this day, and because God is in control and he will do what he's going to do through me. His faith in God would bring the victory where his faith was placed, but only if he acted on that faith. David is offered the king's armor in this process. The king gives him all the armor and sword he could think of, and yet he looks at it and goes, I can't wear that. It's too heavy. It's not what I'm supposed to have. This world says, if you're going to go fight, then you need this and this and this and this to be able to win. And God says, you just need me. You need the faith that you have in me to allow me to do what I need to do through you. God will provide. We just have to be willing to act out on that faith. So David goes and picks up 5 smooth stones, then walks out to the giant of a man, all 9 foot plus of him, and accepts his challenge. Goliath is not amused at the teenage boy's slingshot and 5 smooth stones. He's got a few choice words for David. We see 43 through 44, then 45. Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistines cursed David by his gods. And come here, he said, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David responds, you come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. Big words from a teenage boy. Yeah, he's about that size. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. So he just takes his words and says, there, you can have that back. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. You almost wonder if there's music playing in the background as this challenge is starting. If it was Hollywood, there would be. There would be huge things going on. Flames would be blowing up and birds would be flying by. Don't you wish you could say that every time that Satan comes and attacks us and there are problems that we have? And honestly, we can. It's that we're afraid to trust that God really can do what God says he can do. We're all there. You may not know how things will turn out, but we know no matter what, God is in control of what we're doing. It's not a cop-out. It's not some Christianese. It's not a head stuck in the sand moment when we say that. If we really truly believe in what we believe in, then we should really truly believe in what God says he's going to do. It's the same faith we have when we have a family member or a friend that we know that no matter what, we can call on them and they will drop everything and be there for us whenever we need them. God is the same way. He will be there for us. We just have to pour out the water to wet the washer. Step 3, faith fulfilled. Now the battle begins. Now the Philistines and the Israelites have gotten their popcorn and they're ready to watch this show, because that's all they've been doing for 40 days is just sit there and stare at each other. Verse 48, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down onto the ground. Well, that was anticlimactic. One stone took the guy down. Now, you may know what happens next in this story, but what just happened? A teenager just took down a guy that was 2 or 3 times his size. Now, many believe Goliath actually had a disease called giantism. It's actually a disease, a real medical term. It's a term that's an umbrella term that covers a number of disorders that result in abnormal or excessive growth in the stature of an individual. Most of the time, it's connected to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is right above your left temple and is the size of a pea. But it is the thing that determines how big you are going to be and how tall you're going to be. For some of you, it stopped immediately. For some of you, it kept on going. I will get beat up by my wife for that statement later. But anyway, and my daughter. But that it sends out a hormone that tells your body to keep growing. And what happens is that for some, that never shuts off. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing and going. There was two people that we know in history that really had this, that were famous from it. Robert Wadlow was born in 1918 outside of St. Louis in Alton, Illinois. He ended up growing up to be 8 feet 11 inches tall, 439 pounds. And he was skinny. Good luck finding clothes for him and the shoes. He would only live to be 22 years old. His body just could not take the massive growth of him doing that. When he was a baby at 6 months old, he was 30 pounds. And they knew when he was 12, well, they knew ahead of time, but when he was 12, he was actually diagnosed with this disease. It was a huge issue for him. And if you go to the Ripley's Believe It or Not, you will find a whole section on him because he was part of the thing that Ripley would go and find all these oddities in the world. The second person is more my speed when I was growing up as a kid. Now, I don't watch wrestling very much, but there was a guy named Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant, WWF, back in the day, Hulk Hogan and all those battles. Andre the Giant was a little bit of a big man. He grew to be 7 feet 4 inches tall. And he was 520 pounds as an adult. He would live to be 44 years old. Now, you may know him from his other thing that he does. That's one of my wife's favorite movies, The Princess Bride. He was with that silly Sicilian who determined that you could never con a Sicilian. And yet, they always seem to lose somehow. But he loved that role in that movie. It was very different than what he'd done before. But he didn't have to have a whole lot of acting skills in that. He just had to be big and walk around and say a few lines. But he was huge, and he knew it, and people saw him when he walked in. Now, both of those men had that disease, and one of the things that you find with that disease is that their plates in their skull, most people, they fuse together, and your skull is firm, and so if you get hit in the head, which I've been hit in the head a couple times, but you get hit in the head, it doesn't do anything because your skull protects it. But for them, there's a spot that's left open between the skull plates. Maybe just big enough for a rock to hit somebody in the middle of the forehead and hit directly to the brain. So that's what they think probably happened, is that his skull had not completely formed, and by God's wisdom and his ability, it hit right between there and took his brain, hit his brain. God uses things and situations to fulfill his mission. It's not our job to know what those are or that we are called to act on. We are called to act on that faith. Just like David acted on his faith, we have to pour out the water and pump hard. Step number 4 is the faith impact. We continue in verse 51. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. The men of the Israelites and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and the gates of Ekron. So now the Israelites, we can do this, and so they take off. Okay, David's done all the hard work. Now they get to have all the fun. David's faith led to a moment where God showed up, and his victory was accomplished, and David's faith was rewarded, and the enemy was filled with fear, and David's people were emboldened and attacked. Our faith can have so many impacts. Those who see God at work in our lives and see how it changes our lives. And they want to know what's different, what makes us special. Why do those things happen for us? Now, at this point, you may look at David as someone who has more faith than you or I. How do we compete with that? But even in that moment, David had faith that would come through. He still had fear. Now, one thing I wanted to say real quick about Goliath, when David cut off his head, it says that he ran to Jerusalem with that head. I don't know why. Memento, put it on his altar. I don't know. There are some scholars that believe that there is a possibility that when he ran there, that he buried it outside the city. And there is actually a hill outside of Jerusalem that is in the shape of a skull. And they think that maybe he buried that head there. And that would be the same spot that Jesus would be crucified on the cross. And how much of an impact is it that David takes down Goliath, defeats the Philistine army, takes his skull and buries it there, and that it is the same hill that Jesus comes and defeats sin by his death and resurrection. Now, they're still trying to figure out whether that's accurate or not, but the facts seem to lean towards that. And so that would be an awesome connection about those two things. But I want to get back to David's fear. We may look at him and think he's never been fearful at all. And yet David in his 27th Psalm talks about it. I want to read that to you. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident. One thing I will ask from the Lord, this only to do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At his sacred tent I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Hear my voice when I call, Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says to you, seek his face. Your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, God my Savior. Though my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, Lord. Lead me in the straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desires of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, spouting malicious accusations. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. It sounds like a man who is trying to remind himself to be faithful to God and trust God's plan. Even in the midst of, as he wrote this, the history says that he was dealing with just leaving home. There was people saying false things about him, and King Saul was chasing him all over the countryside trying to kill him. After all David had done, just a few years later, Saul was chasing him. When you look at verse 18 of 1 Samuel, verse 6, chapter 18, verse 6, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Saul was very angry and his refrain displeased him greatly. They had credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Saul forgot the fact that God was in charge and started to worry about what was coming behind him. He knew David now was going to eventually be king, but he didn't know what was going to happen. And instead, he focused on fear instead of God's plan. Drink the water. As we conclude today, anyone who followed the instructions of the desert Pete was rewarded by fresh, cool, clean water. It was the choice how much they drank, what they did with it, and even if they drank any of it. But why go through all that hard work and not actually drink the water? Or worse, to not leave the jar full of water behind for the next fellow. Our main point today is this: faith in God's plan, not our own, can change the world. I want to say that again. Faith in God's plan, not our own, can change the world. The same is true with our faith. People are watching, kids, fellow Christians, new Christians, those thinking about accepting Christ, and those who don't even believe in God at all. They are watching about how we stick to our faith when we say we do. To be a true follower of Christ, we have to follow the instructions of God's word. When we cherry pick God's instructions in his word and choose to follow only the things that we want to, our faith will only fall apart. But if we are willing to follow God, let the seed fall where it's supposed so it can grow, our faith will grow in good soil. David didn't have faith in his rock. David didn't have faith in his slingshot. David didn't have faith in the Israelite army or the armor of the king. David had faith in God. He believed in what God's plan was. And he knew that he had to be the next person to leave the jar full of water for the next fellow. So as we finish up today, this is my question to you. Are you willing to follow the instructions? Are you willing to be the person who leaves the jar of water behind so that the next person can be able to know who God is? We're going to stand and sing here in just a few minutes. And as we do that, we're going to praise God. And we're going to worship our God. And we're going to worship him for all the faithfulness he gives us. And if this is a moment where you have felt like God has been pulling on your heart that you need to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, this is the chance to come forward and do that. Or if you have been wanting to rededicate your life, or if you've been looking for a church home, or if you just need prayer, there are prayer warriors that will be in the back that are willing to pray with you about anything that's going on in your life. But don't take this opportunity lightly. Trust in the fact that God has set us in this moment so that we can be able to spend time with him outside of the world as we stand and sing.